I liked Berry as a person. I liked what he was doing, but always you were conscious that the work that he was doing was running on a shoestring. So what you were always trying to do is to say, well, hold on, Berry, there might be pockets of money here, there might be pockets of money there, or if I can fiddle some money, well, the polite way is to say, if I can wire some money from this pocket to your pocket, that might be a way of doing it, So I knew a fair amount of what he was doing, and it was laudable work. The other issue was that Berry was actually, in many respects, a symbol, a totem for the various communities, especially the younger communities around there. And it was something to be lauded, the work he was doing, and the fact that he was willing to take a stand about a variety of things. The most recent one is that I know some of you are graduates from Salford University, and the most recent one that I do recall, do you mention names here? You name? Okay. Was a black female student called Andrea Clark, and she was doing a medical course at Salford University. And Andrea was an interesting personality insofar as that she was a lot older, because she'd come up the irregular route into education, into higher education. Andrea was a lot older than the 19, 20-year-old students. I think Andrea must have been about 25, 26, 27 by the time she got there. So Andrea, as a black 26, 27-year-old, wasn't going to take any rubbish from staff. And so obviously she was, it happens, you get into trouble. And what happened, one very clear thing that he brought to our attention eventually was how Andrea was getting, I'm choosing my words carefully, how Andrea was getting marks which were not appropriate. That Andrea was actually quite competent, and she was very personable, and also that she had the experience of a 26-year-old compared to an 18, 19-year-old. But her marks didn't reflect the fact that she had this worldwide experience. And it finally came to a head in her final year of the BA or BSc course, where they gave her a pass mark. And she'd worked quite hard, according to her. She'd worked quite hard. And she's, as I said, she had this experience of 26 years compared to an 18, 19-year-old. And to get a pass mark, it was a bit odd. So what happened is that she looked around for people who would fight her cause for her. And one of the things was the WIOCC and Berry. And this was shortly before Berry died, actually. So you're going back, 10 years? Yeah. And Berry picked up a case at the university. And then so he involved us because we had more of an educational background than Berry. So he involved us, and then we went through some of the papers, but Berry was the front person. And what we found was that there were flaws in the marking, that she didn't, I think one exam, I think she probably got about 17% or something, which is ludicrous, because nowadays in exams, if you write your name right, you get 5%. So to get 17% in a paper, you have to work hard to get 17% in a paper. Berry picked it up, and he initiated a series of meetings with first the welfare department at the university, then with the department itself. And he was met with a fair amount of resistance. Who is this big black guy who's coming in, and who's he? He's got nothing to do with education. What's he doing telling us that we've been unfair to this woman, we're professionals, etc. It went on, and it ended up that some of us also got involved and supported him, and Berry finally won the battle to get her final year exams remarked. So instead of getting an ordinary pass degree, she actually ended up as a first class honours, which is a lot of difference from 17% to over 70%. And that's down to Berry. That's one thing I remember very clearly, because what we were very aware of was that he had the bottle to take on the professionals in a medical sphere that he knew nothing about, but he realized that there was a certain injustice, and logically a 26-year-old doesn't end up with 17% as a mark. So the arguments that he led and the disputes that he fronted, there were about 4, 5, 6 meetings at the university, at Salford University, and it ended up the university conceded that they would have some blind marking from other people on her papers. And so from 17%, which is, or whatever it was, a pass, she moved up 5 grades to a first-class honours. Now, the interesting thing about that is that first-class honours allowed her then to move on to a second degree. She's doing well. I met her recently. She's been offered for a doctorate from Oxford and also from Edinburgh University. And she's now doing medical work, paramedical work in Nigeria, so she's commuting backwards and forwards. So she's doing well. That is a very concrete one. The others are much more nebulous in that, for example, he was a key in keeping the Sunday school, the supplementary school running. He was a key in keeping the youth club running. And also because Berry had a physical presence, he was able to impose a certain discipline onto kids who might have been errant. Yeah, Berry was a bodybuilder in his youth, and he lifted weights and everything. And as he got fatter and older, like the rest of us, but it was still there, and he still had the presence. And he was always willing to use that presence to say, "Look, hold on, son. What are you doing? Think about this, whatever." And Berry was a good one for pushing people into education. Have you thought about whatever it is? You say, can you think of specifics? No, I've given you one specific, but the rest of it is creating an ethos which came around, I would argue, because he had to fight the battles himself when he first came to the UK. I think he was a printer, wasn't he? He was a printer, and they ran a clothes shop, no blacks, and he had to fight the battles there. So that got him into the groove, or whatever it was, that got him into the pattern of saying, look, there is an injustice. I'm not prepared to sit back. I'm going to try and help to overcome this injustice. And I've given you one specific, which I remember clearly, but generally, it's like a seepage. He carried it across a whole series of peoples, a whole series of issues, a whole series of fields. And all of it was not just based around the WIOCC, but also based around the fact that he was a known personality in and around the centre of Manchester. Berry was no mug. He was quite astute politically. So Berry he made friends, and he made friends quite easily, because people knew that he was a fairly straight guy, fairly straight arrow. And Berry made some quite influential friends, for example, like the principal of adult education, like some leading politicians within the local authorities. And he would be able to work those friendships to the benefit, not of him, but of issues that he was involved in. For example, picking up perhaps use of transportation, picking up use of, for example, at one time when the local authority was quite rich, they used to have their own holiday places up in the Lake District for kids, stuff like that. And though he wasn't part of the local authority, because he was astute enough and political enough to work the system, he could get favours in, and therefore get access for non-statutory provision users to use statutory provision. Berry was, in his youth, he was a bodybuilder and weightlifter and everything, and also I'd done weights and everything, so we used to kid each other about weights that we used to lie to each other, we used to do so many kilos, probably we were both lying and exaggerating how many kilos we used to bench press or whatever it was, but it was a fairly good relationship. I'm sure that Berry, because he was adroit enough and political enough, he would have been able to get access to leisure activities run by other organisations in and around Moss Side, if he so wanted. He had a very good rapport with adult and community education, which would run a lot of adult and community centres and leisure centres. So I'm sure, knowing Berry, he would have exploited it. He was a big lad. Physically, he was a big lad. And sometimes he thought his persona and his size, he could bluff it. Yeah? And I think but he wasn't doing it for his own, Berry wasn't doing it for lining his own pocket or lining his family's pocket. He was doing it for a greater good. He would try and perhaps bullshit or bluff a bit. And I think, when you say was anything detrimental about him, but that also made him interesting, because it'd be interesting to talk to a guy who's trying to bullshit you. Yeah? If you have a look at the funeral, and the turnout at the funeral, and the amount of people who were willing to, it was an all-day job. And I think what I have to say is neither here nor there. The fact that people took to the streets, went to the funeral, stayed the whole day, I think that explains what people felt about Beresford, and how they felt that his passing, his death, everybody knew, because Berry wasn't a young bloke. Everybody knew that it was going to come, but when it came, it did have an impact. And I think the impact is that you had a totemic figure. You know, physically he was big, he was brash, and he's gone. And I think that's the loss.